At Westbridge High, not everyone plays by the rules. Amelia Carter, scholarship student and daughter of a 4-star general, just tried to honor her father in an essay and was called a liar. But the injustice didn't stop there. In a school where privilege shields the guilty, her fight for truth was only beginning. Westbridge High School had a reputation that stretched beyond the borders of Virginia. Its hallways gleamed under fluorescent lights, lockers were lined in perfect rows, and every inch of the campus screamed prestige. Students walked through the halls as if they owned the place, their designer backpacks swinging with casual confidence. Among them was Amelia Carter, 16 years old, careful, disciplined, and burdened with a reality her classmates couldn't even begin to imagine. She had grown up in the shadow of her father's service, living in a modest apartment near Fort Hamilton while he commanded troops overseas. Her life was measured in routines, in careful steps, in knowing exactly how to carry herself so that no one could misjudge her intentions. The essay assignment was simple: write about a hero in your life. For most students, it was a chance to showcase creativity or brag about family accomplishments that fit neatly into the polished image the school expected. Amelia's hand hovered over the paper as she thought about her father, General Marcus Carter. He was a 4-star general in the United States Army, a man whose career had been defined by sacrifices that no civilian could ever fully comprehend. Amelia didn't admire him for his medals or rank. She admired the quiet strength he carried, the way he bore responsibilities that could crush any ordinary person, and the values he instilled in her from a young age. She wanted to write about his dedication, the moral code that guided him, and how it shaped her own understanding of honor. When Mrs. Eleanor Whitford, the English teacher, collected the essays, Amelia felt a tension in the room that she couldn't shake. Whitford had a presence that made the room bend to her will, her sharp eyes scanning for any flaw, any sign of weakness that she could publicly criticize. The teacher's approval was reserved for the children of privilege, those whose lives mirrored the wealthy families who funded the school. Amelia, with her scholarship background and modest attire, did not fit that mold. She handed in her essay and returned to her seat, aware that she was stepping into a battleground disguised as a classroom assignment. Whitford read Amelia's essay aloud. The words came out sharp, almost incredulous, highlighting every line that praised General Carter, a 4-star general as a father. Whitford's tone dripped with disbelief, her voice carrying a public skepticism that made other students glance up from their desks. The most laughable thing I've heard all year. Without hesitation, she tore the essay into pieces and tossed them onto Amelia's desk. The scraps fluttered to the floor like leaves caught in a storm. Murmurs rippled through the class, but nobody spoke up. Amelia's fingers itched to gather the pieces, to defend the truth, but she remained composed, keeping her eyes forward and her posture straight. Preston Hale, the senator's son and a figure of authority among his peers, smirked from across the aisle. He had read a similar essay about his father, who had passed a bill in Congress, and was rewarded with a flawless A. Now he looked across at Amelia, his expression a mixture of amusement and condescension. Maybe she should aim lower, he whispered, just loud enough for the people around him to catch. The message was clear in this school. Children of influence commanded the room, and Amelia, despite her intellect and character, was expected to fall in line. Whitford leaned closer, her voice low and cutting. Amelia, this is a creative writing assignment, not a fantasy story. Amelia's hands tightened around the edge of the desk. It's not fantasy, she replied firmly. It's the truth. Whitford laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. She gestured to the room as if showcasing Amelia as an exhibit of audacity gone wrong. You come from a modest background. Your father isn't part of the elite. He doesn't live in a mansion, and your life here doesn't match the narrative you're recreating. The insult stung, but Amelia held her ground. My father is a general. He taught me that duty matters more than wealth. Honor is not about privilege. Whitford's mask slipped entirely, revealing a deep-seated disdain that had nothing to do with academic performance and everything to do with class and skin color. She grabbed the essay fragments from the desk, ripping them again, and declared that Amelia would have to rewrite the assignment, this time focusing on realistic struggles like poverty or neighborhood challenges. Amelia's chest tightened. The injustice of it burned in her throat, but she refused to cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. Lunch brought no relief. The cafeteria was a theater of social hierarchies, and Amelia's position was on the outskirts. Preston spotted her, and his grin widened with cruel intent. He approached, casually picking up a carton of milk from a freshman's tray, and without warning, poured it over Amelia's head, soaking her hair, her book, and her hoodie. Students turned away, pretending not to witness the attack. Amelia stayed still, wiped her face with a napkin, and continued calmly, holding her head high as she collected her tray and left the area. The events escalated when Preston and his clique orchestrated a setup to frame Amelia for theft, planting a Rolex in her backpack. When Mrs. Whitford and Principal Raymond Collins discovered the watch, they immediately accused Amelia. She explained, protested, and offered her side, but the administration, biased and complicit, ignored her. Amelia's protests fell on deaf ears. She was suspended, facing potential expulsion, while the real perpetrators smiled from a safe distance. As Amelia walked home that day, clutching the only photograph she had of her family, she felt the weight of betrayal from every adult she had trusted. Her sneakers scuffed against the asphalt, her body weary from humiliation and fear, yet her mind remained alert. She assessed her surroundings, aware of every potential threat, every shadow. Her father's lessons in discipline and resilience echoed in her thoughts, even when facing injustice. One must stand with integrity and courage. By the next morning, Westbridge High faced the arrival of General Marcus Carter. Amelia's father, in full dress uniform, arrived with a convoy of military vehicles. The school was immobilized as he confronted the administration and Preston. Satellite evidence, staff testimonies, and documentation of fraudulent grading practices were brought to light. The truth about Amelia's father, her honor, and the school's corruption could no longer be denied. Whitford's complicity, Collins's negligence, and Preston's cruelty were exposed, leaving the perpetrators shocked and vulnerable. In the halls of Westbridge High, the balance of power shifted. Amelia, once marginalized and vilified, now stood validated. Her father's presence commanded respect, his authority undeniable. The lesson was clear: truth, integrity, and courage could withstand prejudice, abuse, and systemic corruption. Amelia had endured every humiliation, every assault, and every betrayal, and she emerged not defeated but resilient, a young woman fortified by the strength of her principles and the unwavering support of her father. The first bell of the day rang at Westbridge High School, echoing through the pristine hallways and signaling the beginning of another day filled with unspoken competitions and carefully guarded reputations. Students moved with purpose, their footsteps measured, backpacks swinging in rhythm with the confidence that privilege gave them. Amelia Carter navigated the crowded hallways, her books pressed tightly against her chest. Today was another test of her resolve, not in academics, but in surviving the scrutiny and judgment that awaited her from the school's unyielding social hierarchy. She had always known that being different, being a scholarship student and the daughter of a 4-star general, meant that her every action would be examined, questioned, and often misunderstood. Her English class, taught by Mrs. Eleanor Whitford, was particularly unforgiving. Whitford was a veteran teacher with an impeccable record and a reputation for excellence. But beneath that exterior lay a deep prejudice against students who didn't match her idea of privilege. She had a sharp eye for imperfection and an even sharper tongue for criticism. Amelia's classmates, mostly from wealthy families with political connections, seemed to glide through Whitford's approval effortlessly. Amelia, on the other hand, had to navigate a minefield where one wrong word or misstep could invite public humiliation. The essay assignment, "Write about a hero in your life," was deceptively simple. For most students, it was a chance to showcase family achievements, to craft narratives that reinforced the images they projected. Amelia wrote about her father, General Marcus Carter, not for glory or prestige, but because he represented everything she admired: courage, integrity, and sacrifice. He was a man whose career had demanded relentless commitment, leaving little room for personal comfort. Yet he had shaped Amelia's character with lessons in honor and responsibility. Her essay spoke of the weight of his duty, the quiet moments of guidance he offered, and the moral compass that guided both him and, by extension, her own life. When Mrs. Whitford began reading the essays aloud, Amelia felt the familiar tightening of her chest. The teacher's voice, even when calm, carried authority that could cut through confidence like a knife. Whitford paused at Amelia's essay, her tone shifting to disbelief and derision. A 4-star general as a father. She scoffed, reading aloud the passages that detailed her father's service. The other students shifted in their seats, some smirking, others unsure of how to react. Then Whitford tore the essay into pieces and flung them onto Amelia's desk, the fragments scattering like dry leaves in the wind. The room reacted, but not with support. A few whispers, a couple of chuckles, but no one stepped forward to challenge the teacher. Amelia's hands rested on the desk, and she straightened her back, her determination keeping her from gathering the torn paper or speaking out. Across the aisle, Preston Hale, the senator's son, watched with a smug expression. He had just read his own essay about his father's political achievements and had received praise and an A. He now leaned back, enjoying the sight of Amelia being undermined. Maybe she should aim lower, he whispered, just loud enough for a few nearby students to hear. It was a subtle assertion of power, a reminder that in this school, status and wealth dictated who could command attention and respect. Amelia acknowledged the remark with a measured calm, refusing to give him the reaction he sought. Whitford approached Amelia, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. Her voice was low, insidious, and filled with condescension. "Amelia, this is a creative writing assignment, not a fantasy story. We need realism, not fabrications about family achievements that don't match your background." Amelia met her gaze steadily. "It's not a fabrication," she said firmly. "It's the truth." Whitford's response was a dry, humorless laugh. She gestured at the classroom as if Amelia were a cautionary tale, a display of audacity that needed to be punished. "You come from a modest home. Your father does not live in a mansion, and your life does not resemble the narrative you are trying to write. That is not reality." Amelia's hands tightened into fists beneath the desk, but she kept her posture straight. "My father serves this country. That is reality. Honor and duty are not measured by wealth." Whitford's patience wore thin. She snatched the torn essay fragments from Amelia's desk and, with deliberate cruelty, tore them further, announcing that Amelia would have to rewrite the assignment. This time, she instructed, Amelia would write about the hardships of her neighborhood or her family's struggles, subjects deemed realistic by Whitford's biased standards. Amelia's chest tightened with frustration, the weight of injustice pressing against her, but she refused to cry or show despair. She carefully collected her books and left the classroom, maintaining her dignity in the face of public humiliation. Lunch offered no relief. Amelia sat at the edge of the cafeteria, away from the clusters of wealthy students, quietly unpacking her food. Preston saw her and approached with calculated malice, carrying a carton of milk. Without hesitation, he poured it over Amelia's head, drenching her hair, books, and hoodie. The cafeteria erupted in murmurs, but no one intervened. Amelia stood, wiped her face with a napkin, collected her tray, and left the area calmly, demonstrating that her composure could not be broken, even in public embarrassment. The situation escalated when Preston and Mrs. Whitford orchestrated a trap, placing a valuable Rolex in Amelia's backpack. When the watch was discovered, Amelia was immediately accused of theft. She protested, explaining that she had not touched the watch, but the administration, influenced by bias and favoritism, ignored her claims. Principal Raymond Collins and Whitford colluded silently, ready to enforce punishment without considering her side of the story. Amelia faced suspension, a public mark against her character, while the true culprits remained untouched by consequence. As she walked home that afternoon, Amelia clutched the only photograph she had of her family, the image of her parents smiling, a reminder of love and guidance amidst adversity. The weight of betrayal and injustice pressed down on her, but she maintained her focus, carefully scanning her path and planning her next steps. Her father's lessons in resilience, integrity, and courage echoed in her mind. She would not yield to intimidation, nor would she let false accusations define her. By the next morning, Westbridge High would witness the arrival of General Marcus Carter. Amelia's father, in full military dress, accompanied by a convoy of Army military police vehicles, arrived to confront the injustices against his daughter. The administration, students, and faculty were forced to confront the truth. Evidence, satellite footage, and witness statements proved that Amelia had been wronged. Whitford's complicity, Collins's negligence, and Preston's actions were laid bare, and the scales of power shifted abruptly. Standing beside her father, Amelia felt the validation that had been denied to her, the support of authority in its most undeniable form. General Carter's presence commanded respect and made it clear that injustice, no matter how entrenched in wealth or status, would not go unchallenged. In that moment, Amelia's position at Westbridge High transformed from a target of ridicule to a symbol of resilience and integrity. Her strength, cultivated over years under her father's guidance, became evident to everyone who had doubted her. The experience taught Amelia that honor and truth were not determined by social status, but by courage and principle. Even when faced with a system designed to suppress her, she remained steadfast. The challenges of Westbridge High, the prejudice, and the orchestrated attacks against her were obstacles she could withstand. With her father at her side, she understood that the fight for justice was never hers alone, but a shared responsibility, reinforced by those who wielded authority rightly. In the halls of Westbridge High, the lesson was clear: integrity, courage, and the willingness to stand against wrongdoing could overcome the entrenched power of privilege. The tension at Westbridge High had been building for days, but nothing prepared Amelia Carter for what awaited her during lunch. The cafeteria was a sea of chatter and laughter, but Amelia felt a weight pressing down as she carried her tray to a small table on the edge of the room. Every eye seemed to judge her, every whisper a dagger aimed at her dignity. She carefully set down her lunch, aware that her every movement would be observed, critiqued, and possibly twisted into gossip. The assignment that had been destroyed by Mrs. Whitford earlier had already spread across the school in distorted versions, and Preston Hale, the senator's son, had been carefully curating the story to maximize her humiliation. Preston approached with calculated ease, his varsity jacket gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He carried a carton of milk, a small grin playing on his lips. Without warning, he tipped it over Amelia's head, the cold liquid soaking her hair, her hoodie, and her books. Students around them shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to see, others smirking at her misfortune. Amelia grabbed a napkin and began wiping herself off, maintaining her composure. Her heart hammered, but her resolve did not waver. She would not give him the reaction he craved. Every step she took, every action she performed was deliberate, measured, a demonstration that she would not be broken by bullying or prejudice. The humiliation was far from over. Amelia returned to her bag, only to discover that Preston and his clique had planted a Rolex in her backpack. It was an elaborate setup designed to make her appear guilty of theft. Whitford and Principal Raymond Collins were quick to act, accusing Amelia and demanding an explanation. She protested, asserting her innocence, but her words fell on ears that were deafened by bias and favoritism. Collins and Whitford had already made their decision, ready to enforce punishment without considering her side of the story. Amelia's protests, reasoned and calm, were dismissed, leaving her suspended and facing the possibility of expulsion. Walking home that afternoon, Amelia clutched the only photograph she had of her family, her parents smiling, a moment frozen in time that reminded her of love and guidance. The betrayal she felt from adults she had trusted pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she maintained focus. Her father's lessons in resilience and integrity guided her thoughts. He had taught her that truth and honor mattered more than public opinion or the judgments of those blinded by privilege. Amelia's mind raced, planning her next steps, aware that she could not rely on the school to recognize justice on its own. The next morning, Westbridge High would witness an unexpected arrival. General Marcus Carter, Amelia's father, arrived at the school in full military dress uniform, accompanied by a convoy of Army military police vehicles. The sight of the uniformed officers, their precision and authority, created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The school that had seemed untouchable moments before was now under scrutiny from a force that demanded accountability. General Carter moved with purpose, every gesture deliberate, and every step calculated to communicate authority. He had come not only to protect his daughter but to confront the systemic injustices that had allowed her humiliation to occur. Standing beside her father, Amelia felt a mixture of relief and validation. The presence of a four-star general brought immediate attention and respect, forcing the school to confront the truth. Satellite images, witness statements, and evidence of fraudulent grading practices were presented, leaving no room for Whitford or Collins to hide behind their positions. The power dynamics shifted instantly, with Amelia's innocence and integrity now visible to everyone who had doubted her. Whitford's arrogance faltered as General Carter displayed evidence proving her complicity in both bullying and academic sabotage. The confrontation extended beyond just the administration. Preston Hale, who had orchestrated much of Amelia's public humiliation, now faced the undeniable presence of a man whose authority and moral weight outweighed any privilege he had known. General Carter's demeanor left no room for pretenses. He addressed Preston calmly, but with the gravity that comes from someone who has faced real danger and understands accountability. Amelia stood beside her father, proud and composed, a visible testament to the values he had instilled in her. Through the course of the investigation, the extent of corruption and prejudice became apparent. Allegra Brooks, a custodian and former Marine, came forward with evidence of altered grades and conversations that exposed Whitford's bias and her financial connections to Preston's family. The evidence was overwhelming. Scholarship students and minority students had been systematically targeted, their achievements minimized or erased, to make room for the children of the wealthy elite. Amelia's struggles were no longer personal, they were a reflection of an institutional pattern of discrimination and manipulation. General Carter ensured that every detail was documented. Satellite footage confirmed Whitford's presence during Amelia's assault in the cafeteria. Testimonies, backed by physical evidence, traced the manipulation of academic records and the deliberate targeting of students who threatened the status quo. Even those who had tried to maintain the appearance of fairness could not escape the overwhelming clarity of the facts. The school's administration was forced to confront its failures, and the students began to see that privilege alone did not equate to justice. Amelia herself became a symbol of resilience. Every moment of composed defiance, every measured reaction to harassment, contributed to a growing narrative that highlighted courage over cruelty. Her father's intervention, while decisive, also emphasized that integrity must be cultivated and defended. Amelia had faced false accusations, public humiliation, and deliberate physical harm, yet she remained grounded in her principles. Her character, shaped by discipline, values, and the guidance of her father, stood in stark contrast to the entitlement and arrogance displayed by those who had tried to suppress her. By the end of the confrontation, the school's hierarchy had shifted irrevocably. Whitford was held accountable, facing disciplinary actions for her behavior, and Principal Collins was forced to acknowledge the complicity and negligence that had contributed to the situation. Preston's actions were scrutinized, and the consequences of his behavior became unavoidable. General Carter's presence had not only protected his daughter but also illuminated systemic injustices, demonstrating that accountability extends beyond mere appearances. The lessons of the ordeal were profound. Westbridge High would never look the same to those who had witnessed the events, and Amelia's experience became a case study in the importance of integrity, perseverance, and moral courage. Her father's support, combined with her own strength of character, ensured that justice was not merely symbolic but actual. In standing up against bias, manipulation, and bullying, Amelia had transformed her personal struggle into a larger narrative of fairness, proving that truth and honor could withstand the weight of institutional power. Amelia left the school that day knowing that her fight had not ended, but that she had emerged stronger and validated. Her reputation, once threatened, had been restored, and her father's presence ensured that any future attempts at injustice would be met with accountability. The experience solidified her understanding of the values her father had instilled: courage, integrity, and the unwavering pursuit of justice, regardless of the obstacles or the opposition. At Westbridge High, the balance of power had been tested, and Amelia had proven that dignity and honor are never determined by wealth, status, or manipulation. The aftermath of the cafeteria incident lingered over Westbridge High, casting a shadow that Amelia Carter felt with every step she took through the halls. Her textbooks were pressed to her chest, her hair still damp from the milk that Preston Hale had poured over her the day before. Students whispered as she passed, some glancing with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with cruel amusement. She held her head high, refusing to show the emotional weight of the humiliation, but the event had left her wary and tense. She knew the school had turned against her, and the alliances between privilege and authority would make it difficult for anyone to intervene on her behalf. The locker room became the next stage of this carefully orchestrated torment. Preston had arranged for Amelia to be blamed for the theft of his expensive Rolex. As she organized her gym bag, a classmate under duress from Preston's subtle intimidation slipped the watch into her belongings. Amelia, unaware, continued her routine until she was suddenly confronted by Mrs. Whitford. The teacher's presence was commanding, and her voice cut through the chatter of the other students with an authority that left little room for protest. "Amelia Carter, empty your bag," she demanded, gesturing toward the principal's office. Amelia's heart raced, but she did not panic. Her father had trained her to think before acting, to assess threats, and to maintain her composure even when unfairly targeted. She complied, handing over her bag, knowing that if she resisted, it would only add fuel to the false narrative being constructed against her. Whitford's eyes scanned the contents and, with a faint smirk, produced the Rolex. The accusation hung in the air, and the locker room's previous chatter dissolved into anxious observation. Students shifted uncomfortably, sensing the gravity of the accusation, yet no one stepped forward to offer Amelia support. As Amelia tried to articulate her innocence, Mrs. Whitford dismissed her explanation. "You were near his locker. Several witnesses placed you there before class," she said, her tone cutting and dismissive. Amelia shook her head, her voice firm yet controlled. "I haven't been near his locker. I avoid him whenever possible." Whitford's response was a mixture of condescension and theatrical indignation. "Defensiveness is a symptom of guilt. Give me the bag or I will call the police." Amelia complied, her hands steady as she handed over the bag, knowing that her honesty and posure were all she had to rely on. The walk to Principal Raymond Collins' office felt like moving through a gauntlet. Students lined the corridors, their eyes darting toward her as though she were an exhibit in some cruel experiment. Preston stood along the route, his presence a silent reminder of the power dynamics at play. He watched with calculated interest, noting every expression, every reaction, anticipating a crack in her resolve. Amelia maintained her posture, each step deliberate, embodying the lessons her father had imparted about endurance, courage, and strategy. Once inside the office, Amelia faced both Collins and Whitford. The principal, ever concerned with the school's public image and financial patrons, regarded Amelia with a mixture of skepticism and caution. The accusation of theft carried serious implications, and Collins, knowing the influence of Preston's family, was already inclined to take Whitford's side. Amelia spoke carefully, recounting the events of the previous day, emphasizing her innocence and the orchestrated nature of the setup. Her words were precise, her tone calm, reflecting a maturity far beyond her years. Whitford, sensing the threat to her authority, leaned forward, her voice rising with accusation. She painted a narrative of a reckless student attempting to fabricate prestige and exploit the trust of her peers. Her language was precise, designed to manipulate the perception of the principal and anyone who might later hear the story. Amelia listened, absorbing each accusation, then countered with reasoned clarity. She described the exact sequence of events, her awareness of Preston's actions, and her consistent avoidance of confrontation. Her evidence was circumstantial but compelling, highlighting the premeditation behind the attack and the falsification of the theft claim. Collins, caught between the weight of evidence and the potential fallout with the senator's family, hesitated. His mind raced through possible outcomes: a public scandal, the loss of donations, and the political ramifications. Amelia noticed his hesitation, understanding that while he held authority, he was not infallible. She maintained her composure, offering clarity without anger, showing the resilience that her father had instilled. Each word, each pause, was calculated to demonstrate both her innocence and her steadfast character. The conversation intensified when Preston interjected, attempting to manipulate the situation further. He presented his version of events, emphasizing Amelia's supposed guilt and framing the narrative to favor his social standing. Amelia responded without confrontation, detailing discrepancies in his story and pointing out inconsistencies that could be corroborated by witnesses. Her measured delivery began to shift the perception within the room, subtly undermining Preston's credibility while showcasing her own reliability and moral clarity. Amelia's strategy extended beyond mere words. She drew upon her knowledge of her father's teachings about patience and observation, remaining poised even as the adults around her tried to dictate the outcome. Her controlled demeanor contrasted sharply with Whitford's dramatic gestures and Preston's entitled arrogance. She was not reacting emotionally. She was presenting a case built on facts, careful observation, and integrity. Her approach emphasized that true strength was not in intimidation or manipulation, but in consistency, reason, and the courage to endure unfair treatment. As the meeting progressed, the scope of the injustice became clear. Evidence provided by allies, including subtle documentation from the school custodian who had observed irregularities in grading and interactions, added weight to Amelia's claims. Satellite images from outside the school, combined with eyewitness accounts, began to establish a pattern of prejudice and targeted harassment. The orchestrated attacks, both social and physical, were no longer isolated incidents, but part of a broader system of manipulation designed to protect privileged students and suppress those who challenged the hierarchy. By the time the meeting concluded, Amelia had transformed from a target of orchestrated bullying into a figure of resilience and integrity. Her calm, reasoned approach had demonstrated the deliberate nature of the attacks against her, highlighting not only her own character but the systemic failings of the school administration. Preston's entitlement and Whitford's bias were laid bare, revealing vulnerabilities in the structures that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Amelia left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. The hallway, once oppressive and full of judgment, now felt navigable. Students who had once whispered behind her back regarded her with tentative respect, aware that the power dynamics had shifted. Her father's lessons in courage, discipline, and moral integrity had guided her through one of the most challenging experiences of her young life. She understood that the fight for justice required patience, observation, and the ability to maintain composure in the face of orchestrated adversity. The incident solidified Amelia's understanding that truth, integrity, and perseverance could withstand attempts to undermine them. Even when the perpetrators wielded wealth, privilege, and authority, she had been tested, publicly humiliated, and falsely accused, yet she emerged not defeated but strengthened, embodying the very values her father had spent years instilling. Westbridge High had witnessed a demonstration of resilience, and Amelia had proven that courage and integrity were not determined by social status, but by character and steadfastness in the pursuit of justice. The school day continued to unfold with a quiet intensity, each hallway and classroom holding the tension of yesterday's events. Amelia Carter moved through the corridors with careful awareness, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her eyes scanning for any sign of confrontation. The whispers had not stopped. Students exchanged glances, some sympathetic, many not, and a few actively feeding the rumors of her supposed misdeeds. Even though she knew the truth, the perception held by the administration and the popular students created a tangible obstacle. She was alone in her struggle, but she was not without strategy. Amelia had learned to navigate adversity with precision, drawing on the discipline her father had instilled in her from a young age. During her next class, the air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. Preston Hale, flanked by a couple of his loyal teammates, sauntered into the room with a confidence born from wealth and social advantage. His eyes flicked to Amelia and a smirk curved his lips, signaling that the events from the cafeteria were far from forgotten. He had already manipulated the narrative among the student body, presenting her as a liar and thief, and he expected that narrative to hold sway over any adult authority as well. Amelia sat upright, her fingers resting on her notebook, prepared to respond to any attempt to provoke a reaction. Her training in focus and measured response allowed her to remain poised, even when every cell in her body braced for conflict. The classroom became a stage for subtle intimidation. Preston whispered comments to his friends, loud enough for some to overhear, carefully orchestrating the perception that Amelia was guilty and out of place. Mrs. Whitford, ever observant of the social hierarchies she reinforced, shot Amelia a pointed glance, her eyebrows raised in what seemed like disbelief and accusation. Amelia's heart rate increased slightly, but she did not flinch. She kept her notebook open, her pen ready, as if the act of writing could serve as a shield against the unjust scrutiny she faced. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Amelia prepared for what she knew would be the most precarious part of her day, the hallways and the cafeteria. The transition between classes had become a gauntlet, a place where the unspoken rules of the school's social order were enforced with subtle threats and outright intimidation. Amelia moved with deliberate calm, weaving through clusters of students, her gaze focused and determined. Preston and his friends trailed her, creating an invisible pressure that weighed on her every step. She had learned to anticipate their maneuvers, to observe without giving away her plan, and to maintain composure even when provoked. The cafeteria, usually a place of nourishment and casual interaction, had become a minefield. Amelia set down her tray at a corner table away from the central cliques. She unpacked her lunch methodically, aware that any abrupt motion could be construed as suspicious or defiant. Across the room, Preston and his teammates watched, assessing her reactions and planning their next move. Amelia's resolve did not falter. She continued her routine, eating slowly, maintaining posture, and refusing to allow her emotions to dictate her actions. Every moment became a demonstration of controlled endurance, a refusal to allow fear or humiliation to dictate her behavior. Suddenly, Preston moved, deliberately bumping into her chair and sending a few papers to the floor. The movement was subtle, calculated to elicit a reaction without overtly violating school rules. Amelia bent to retrieve the papers, keeping her movements calm and measured. She did not rise in anger or confront Preston directly. Instead, she focused on the task at hand, gathering her belongings with precision and ensuring that nothing in her behavior could be used as evidence of guilt or agitation. Her control over the situation was not born of arrogance but of careful strategy, cultivated over years of navigating environments that demanded both discipline and adaptability. The escalation came swiftly. Preston, growing impatient with Amelia's composure, pushed the envelope further by making direct accusations in front of the supervising teacher. "She was at my locker before class," he claimed loudly, his voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. Amelia responded without raising her voice. "I have not been near your locker. I avoid it whenever possible," she said clearly, her tone calm, precise, and unwavering. The teacher hesitated, unsure of which narrative to believe, revealing cracks in the authority that had been presumed unchallengeable. Amelia's approach throughout these confrontations was strategic. She understood the dynamics of power and perception, and she wielded her composure as a tool. She addressed falsehoods directly, maintained factual accuracy, and refused to allow emotional manipulation to dictate her actions. Her responses were calculated, demonstrating a maturity and foresight beyond her years. By focusing on truth, she slowly undermined Preston's constructed narrative, presenting herself as rational and reliable, and forcing others to reconsider the initial assumptions made about her character. Even as the accusations of theft lingered and the planted Rolex continued to be cited as evidence against her, Amelia maintained a clear mental record of events. She was aware of who had witnessed each interaction, what had been said, and the timeline of occurrences. This meticulous attention to detail allowed her to anticipate potential attacks on her credibility and respond in ways that emphasized her integrity without aggression. Her father's teachings in observation and measured reaction were evident in her every move, and they provided her with a strategic advantage even in an environment stacked against her. By the end of the lunch period, the situation had attracted the attention of the school administration. Principal Raymond Collins, concerned with appearances and potential political fallout, had begun to review the events more critically. Amelia seized the opportunity, presenting her side with clarity and calm, outlining the sequence of events, her lack of involvement in the theft, and Preston's role in orchestrating the humiliation. She provided clear and logical arguments, demonstrating that the situation had been manipulated to create a false narrative against her. The exposure of Preston's tactics, combined with Amelia's composed presentation, began to shift the perception of onlookers. Students who had previously whispered or gossiped now watched with a new perspective, recognizing the deliberate manipulation that had taken place. Even Mrs. Whitford's authority, previously unassailable, was challenged by the clarity and consistency of Amelia's account. While bias and social hierarchy still influenced some opinions, the undeniable precision and composure Amelia exhibited forced reconsideration and lent credibility to her claims. As the day progressed, it became clear that Amelia's strategy was effective. The administration could no longer dismiss the evidence of manipulation and harassment without acknowledging the inconsistencies in Preston's accusations. Her measured behavior, combined with a clear understanding of events and factual support, positioned her not merely as a victim but as a competent and rational figure confronting unjust treatment. Amelia's actions demonstrated that integrity, preparation, and strategic calm could counteract even the most calculated attempts at humiliation. By the time the final bell rang, Amelia left the cafeteria with her dignity intact. She had faced targeted harassment, orchestrated humiliation, and false accusations with poise and strategic awareness. Every step she took through the hallways reinforced the lessons her father had instilled: the importance of clarity, the value of composure, and the power of measured response. Her ability to navigate the situation with intelligence and integrity served not only to protect her in the moment, but to establish her as a figure capable of confronting systemic bias and manipulation. Amelia's experience in the cafeteria, while intensely personal, highlighted the broader dynamics at play within Westbridge High. It demonstrated how social hierarchies and power imbalances could be weaponized against those perceived as outsiders. Yet it also showcased the resilience and strategic acumen required to navigate such challenges successfully. Amelia emerged from the ordeal with a reinforced sense of self, a clear understanding of her own capabilities, and the knowledge that truth and integrity, when wielded with precision and calm, could withstand even the most orchestrated adversities. The tension at Westbridge High had reached a boiling point. After days of orchestrated harassment and false accusations, Amelia Carter understood that the situation required more than mere patience. It demanded careful observation and strategic response. She knew that the school's social hierarchy, combined with the administration's bias, created an environment where truth could easily be buried under the weight of privilege and manipulation. Yet Amelia had learned to navigate such landscapes, relying on the lessons her father, General Marcus Carter, had instilled in her: discipline, critical thinking, and unwavering courage. That morning, Amelia entered the hallways with a sense of purpose. She moved through the clusters of students, aware of every glance and every murmur. Preston Hale, the senator's son, lingered near the lockers with his usual entourage, attempting to assert dominance through presence alone. Amelia kept her head high, her posture straight, projecting confidence even as her heart monitored every movement around her. The corridors, once intimidating, now served as a field where she could practice the principles of observation and calculated response she had honed over the past few days. During first period, the tension was palpable. Mrs. Whitford monitored Amelia with a critical eye, looking for any misstep to exploit. Preston, seated across the room, whispered comments to his friends, attempting to provoke a reaction. Amelia's strategy was simple but effective: remain calm, respond only when necessary, and focus on factual clarity. Each time Preston made a veiled insult, she countered with precision, presenting the truth without displaying emotion. Her measured responses created a stark contrast to Preston's theatrics, gradually undermining his influence in the eyes of those around them. By mid-morning, the cafeteria loomed as the most dangerous zone. Students had already witnessed the previous altercations, and whispers of Amelia's supposed guilt had spread. She approached her usual corner table, placing her lunch carefully before scanning the room. Preston and his friends observed from a distance, waiting for a chance to escalate the situation. Amelia anticipated their moves, mentally rehearsing potential outcomes and planning her responses. Every step, every glance was part of a strategy designed to maintain her integrity while minimizing the opportunity for further harassment. Preston made his move first. He intentionally bumped into Amelia's chair, knocking over her papers. Amelia bent to retrieve them, maintaining calm, making certain that her actions could not be construed as aggressive or defensive inappropriately. She returned the papers to her backpack and sat upright, displaying composure and control. Preston smirked, expecting a reaction that never came. His attempts to provoke her had failed, and Amelia's steady demeanor began to alter the perception of the students around her. Those who had been complicit in the gossip, or who had observed her humiliation, started to reconsider their assumptions. The confrontation escalated when Preston loudly accused Amelia of being near his locker before class, implying complicity in the theft of his Rolex. Amelia's response was measured and precise: "I have not been near your locker. I avoid it whenever possible." Her calm and factual tone contrasted sharply with Preston's boastful accusations, forcing the supervising teacher to question the validity of his claims. This moment highlighted Amelia's strategic use of truth and composure to counteract false narratives, demonstrating that integrity and careful articulation could outweigh intimidation and social power. Following the accusation, Amelia returned to her backpack and calmly presented her account of the previous day's events to the supervising teacher. She explained how Preston had orchestrated both the public humiliation and the theft setup, outlining the sequence of events and identifying witnesses. Her clarity and logic began to create doubt in the minds of those who had previously accepted Preston's narrative. Even Mrs. Whitford, who had been instrumental in perpetuating the falsehood, could not refute the consistency and factual basis of Amelia's statements. As the school day progressed, Amelia's resilience became increasingly evident. Each interaction with her peers, the administration, and Preston's clique was approached strategically. She monitored reactions, anticipating potential attacks and preparing factual responses that reinforced her credibility. Students who had previously whispered or laughed at her predicaments started to observe her behavior with a new level of respect. They recognized the careful, thoughtful discipline and courage required to endure repeated harassment without faltering. Amelia's conduct was a quiet rebellion, demonstrating that character and strategy could challenge even entrenched systems of privilege. During the afternoon period, Principal Raymond Collins summoned Amelia to his office. Preston and Mrs. Whitford's earlier accusations had forced the administration to at least consider the validity of the events, and Amelia entered the office prepared to present her case. She spoke clearly, recounting the harassment in the cafeteria, the setup involving the Rolex, and Preston's ongoing intimidation. She referenced specific moments, witnesses, and observable behaviors, creating a compelling narrative based on factual evidence. Her precise articulation left little room for misinterpretation or doubt, challenging the administration to confront the reality of the orchestrated attacks. Collins, aware of the political implications and potential scrutiny from both parents and the media, listened intently. He asked questions that Amelia answered with factual precision, never allowing her tone to betray fear or frustration. Her ability to convey the truth with clarity and composure began to shift the perception of her credibility. The evidence she presented, combined with her confident and strategic delivery, highlighted the calculated nature of Preston and Whitford's actions, revealing the systemic bias and abuse of power that had been overlooked by the school. By the end of the day, the situation had undergone a subtle but meaningful transformation. Amelia's calm and strategic responses had begun to dismantle the false narrative, exposing Preston's orchestrated harassment and Whitford's complicity. The administration, faced with factual evidence and a student whose composure remained intact under duress, could no longer ignore the reality of the injustice. Amelia's conduct demonstrated that patience, discipline, and clear thinking could counteract attempts to manipulate perception, establishing her as a credible and resilient figure within the school environment. Even as students returned home and the day's events concluded, Amelia reflected on the lessons learned. She understood that the struggle she faced was not simply personal but emblematic of broader social dynamics within the school. Her ability to maintain integrity and composure, while strategically presenting evidence and responding to provocation, had shifted the balance of power. She had transformed from a target of harassment into a figure of resilience and authority, demonstrating the effectiveness of strategic calm, critical thinking, and moral courage. Amelia's experience in the halls and classrooms of Westbridge High underscored a central truth: integrity, patience, and strategic response can overcome even the most entrenched social hierarchies and unjust systems. Her father's lessons had equipped her not only to endure but to navigate, analyze, and ultimately challenge the forces aligned against her. Each step of the day, each interaction, reinforced her ability to confront adversity with clarity and strength, turning moments of vulnerability into opportunities to assert control and command respect. By the time Amelia left the school grounds, she had solidified her understanding that her conduct and strategic approach were as important as the facts themselves. She had endured public humiliation, false accusations, and intentional intimidation, yet her integrity and careful composure had prevailed. The day had tested her resolve, sharpened her awareness, and demonstrated the power of strategic thinking in the face of systemic injustice. Amelia emerged not only vindicated in her own eyes but recognized by others as a student capable of navigating adversity with intelligence, courage, and resilience, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The days following Amelia Carter's confrontation with Preston Hale and Mrs. Whitford carried an unsettling tension through Westbridge High. Though the immediate events had been addressed, the ripple effects of false accusations, social manipulation, and administrative bias continued to shape the atmosphere. Amelia moved through the halls with purpose, aware that her every action was observed, judged, and often interpreted through the lens of the ongoing conflict. Her backpack was heavy with books, but heavier still was the weight of responsibility she felt not only to herself, but to the truth she had fought to defend. Each step became a deliberate assertion of her resilience and determination to maintain integrity in an environment designed to suppress it. During her first period, Amelia noticed the subtle shift in behavior among her peers. Some who had laughed at her humiliation now regarded her with tentative respect, their expressions betraying a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Others, still loyal to Preston and the established social hierarchy, whispered and exchanged glances, plotting their next moves. Amelia anticipated these dynamics, aware that perception could be as powerful as reality in shaping outcomes. She focused on her studies, determined to demonstrate that character and intellect were undeniable, regardless of the manipulations unfolding around her. In the cafeteria, the arena of previous attacks, Amelia approached with calm determination. She carried her lunch methodically, selecting a table at the corner, equidistant from clusters of students and potential threats. Preston and his clique were visible across the room, their eyes tracking her movements. Amelia maintained composure, her posture straight, her gaze steady. Every gesture, from setting down her tray to opening her notebook, was intentional, demonstrating that she would not allow intimidation to dictate her behavior. Her presence became a subtle challenge to the social order, signaling that she would endure and resist. Preston's next attempt at escalation was deliberate. He approached with a casual stride, bumping into her chair and attempting to knock over her belongings. Amelia bent to retrieve them carefully, her actions precise and controlled, ensuring that they could not be misinterpreted as defensive aggression. Preston smirked, expecting to evoke a reaction, but Amelia remained unmoved, a testament to her strategic awareness and discipline. Students who had previously gossiped or mocked her observed quietly, their perception of her shifting as they recognized the method and composure in her response. After the minor collision, Preston loudly accused her of being near his locker, insinuating involvement in the theft of his Rolex. Amelia responded with a calm, factual statement, "I have not been near your locker. I avoid it whenever possible." Her measured tone contrasted sharply with Preston's theatrics, forcing the supervising teacher to consider the credibility of both students. This moment highlighted Amelia's strategic use of clarity and factual accuracy to counteract intimidation, demonstrating that controlled responses could challenge the false narratives constructed against her. Later, Amelia returned to her backpack and addressed the supervising teacher, providing a detailed account of the previous day's events. She described the harassment, the setup involving the Rolex, and Preston's orchestrated campaign against her. Her explanation included specific observations and witness references, creating a compelling narrative grounded in fact. The teacher listened, recognizing the consistency and credibility of Amelia's account. Even Mrs. Whitford, who had played a key role in perpetuating the falsehoods, could not dispute the clarity and precision of her statements. Principal Raymond Collins was summoned to review the situation in greater detail. Amelia presented her account with precision, emphasizing the sequence of events, the witnesses, and the deliberate nature of the harassment. Her calm demeanor and logical structure left little room for misinterpretation. Collins, aware of the political and social ramifications of taking sides, weighed the evidence carefully. Amelia's composed and factual presentation created doubt about Preston's accusations and Whitford's bias, forcing the administration to reconsider the previous judgment and investigate the situation thoroughly. Throughout the day, Amelia's strategic approach extended beyond direct confrontations. She maintained observation of her peers and the staff, anticipating potential actions or attempts to undermine her credibility. Each interaction became an opportunity to reinforce her integrity and assert control over the narrative. By the afternoon, students who had previously ridiculed or doubted her began to recognize the deliberate and systematic harassment she had endured, and Amelia's reputation slowly shifted from that of a target to a figure of resilience and intelligence. Amelia's calm perseverance had a subtle but powerful effect on Preston. He found that his usual tactics were ineffective, and his attempts to manipulate the narrative met with resistance and factual refutation. The contrast between his entitlement-fueled behavior and Amelia's composed, evidence-backed responses undermined his credibility. Drawing attention to the orchestrated nature of his harassment, teachers and staff, observing the interactions and reviewing the evidence, began to acknowledge the calculated patterns of intimidation and bias that had allowed such incidents to occur. By the end of the school day, the cumulative impact of Amelia's composure and strategic responses had become evident. The administration, faced with factual evidence and a student who had consistently demonstrated integrity, could no longer dismiss the situation. Preston's influence waned as his attempts to manipulate perception failed, and Mrs. Whitford's authority was challenged by the clarity and consistency of Amelia's account. Witness statements and observable patterns of behavior highlighted the systemic issues within the school, emphasizing the broader implications of the harassment and bias. Amelia left the school that day with a renewed sense of agency and empowerment. The halls that had once been oppressive now felt navigable, her presence commanding subtle respect from those who had previously ignored or dismissed her. She understood that her ability to endure, observe, and respond strategically had shifted the balance of power, demonstrating that integrity and composure could counteract even the most entrenched systems of social hierarchy and manipulation. Reflecting on the events, Amelia recognized the broader lessons embedded in her experience. The confrontation with Preston and Whitford had revealed the influence of privilege, bias, and manipulation in shaping perceptions. Yet it also showcased the power of strategic composure, critical thinking, and unwavering commitment to truth. Amelia had turned personal adversity into a demonstration of resilience, proving that careful observation, methodical response, and moral courage could overcome even orchestrated campaigns of intimidation. Her father's teachings had been evident in every step she took. Amelia had applied his lessons in discipline, observation, and reasoned response to navigate a complex and hostile environment. She had faced physical, social, and institutional challenges with grace and intelligence, ensuring that her actions reinforced her credibility rather than undermining it. In doing so, she not only defended her own integrity but set a standard for others, observing the events that courage, strategy, and moral clarity can disrupt entrenched systems of privilege. By the evening, the cumulative impact of the day's events had begun to take shape. Students, teachers, and administrators alike had witnessed Amelia's resilience and strategic approach. Preston's influence diminished, Whitford's bias was increasingly questioned, and the broader school community became aware of the deliberate manipulation and harassment that had occurred. Amelia's experience served as both a personal victory and a lesson in navigating systemic inequities with intelligence, composure, and integrity. Ultimately, Idea 7 demonstrated a crucial turning point. Amelia Carter had confronted continued harassment and administrative challenges with a disciplined, strategic, and moral approach. She had transformed from a student under attack into a figure of authority and resilience, commanding respect through careful observation, methodical response, and unwavering adherence to truth. Her experience illustrated the power of integrity and strategic composure in the face of adversity, and it set the stage for the resolution of the broader conflict that had shaped her journey at Westbridge High. The tension at Westbridge High continued to escalate, but Amelia Carter had reached a level of determination that gave her the clarity to face the challenges ahead. After days of harassment, false accusations, and careful observation of her peers and teachers, she had begun to understand how deeply the bias and privilege ran in her school. Each hallway she walked through felt like a gauntlet, every glance a potential trap. Yet she had learned to anticipate these challenges and move through them with precision. Her backpack, heavy with books and notes, felt lighter than the weight of the resolve that now guided her steps. In her English classroom, Mrs. Whitford maintained her usual posture of superiority, but Amelia was no longer intimidated. She took her seat with confidence, her notebook ready and her eyes alert to every interaction. Preston Hale, seated a few rows away, whispered comments to his friends, attempting to provoke her. Amelia responded with calm awareness, ignoring the provocations that could have distracted her or allowed him to regain control over the narrative. Each comment, each glance was met with measured composure, demonstrating that she would not allow the social power dynamics to dictate her behavior or reputation. By mid-morning, Amelia had begun to document the details of each interaction meticulously. Every whisper, every shove, every misrepresentation was noted in her notebook, with times and witness names recorded. She understood that systematic documentation could not only protect her but also expose the larger pattern of harassment and bias that had gone unchecked at Westbridge High. Each entry reinforced her sense of agency, reminding her that knowledge and clarity could counteract intimidation and falsehoods. When the bell signaled the transition to the next period, Amelia prepared for the most unpredictable part of her day, the hallways and the cafeteria. Students moved in clusters, and the corridors were filled with the potential for confrontation. Amelia navigated with care, her steps deliberate and her eyes scanning the environment for any indication of escalation. Preston's presence near the lockers reminded her that social hierarchy could manifest physically, and she adjusted her route accordingly, demonstrating foresight and strategic movement. In the cafeteria, Amelia found her usual corner table and set down her lunch with precision. Preston and his clique were visible across the room, observing her and subtly orchestrating intimidation through body language and whispered remarks. Amelia maintained a calm demeanor, refusing to rise to the bait, and focused instead on the task of eating and preparing her notes for the upcoming class discussion. Her composure created a quiet tension in the room, as those who previously followed Preston's lead began to reconsider their assumptions about Amelia and the narrative that had been constructed against her. Preston escalated the situation by bumping into her chair, trying to disrupt her belongings. Amelia bent to retrieve her notebook, ensuring that her movements were deliberate and measured. She avoided confrontation, instead focusing on methodical recovery, demonstrating control over the situation despite the provocation. Her composure contrasted sharply with Preston's attempts at domination, gradually undermining his influence among the students who had previously supported him. Observers began to see the calculated nature of his harassment and Amelia's effective, measured responses. The accusation regarding the Rolex remained a critical point of contention. Amelia had maintained detailed notes about the incident, identifying witnesses and sequences of events that demonstrated Preston's orchestration. When confronted by a teacher or staff member, she presented her account with clarity, ensuring that every statement was supported by observable fact. Her calm and factual responses began to shift the perception of those around her, highlighting inconsistencies in Preston's narrative and undermining the credibility of those attempting to protect his status. During the afternoon, Amelia met with Principal Raymond Collins to present her documented account. She outlined the harassment, the intentional setup, and the ongoing social manipulation, providing names, times, and observable evidence. Her delivery was composed, logical, and firm, leaving little room for misinterpretation. Collins, aware of the potential political ramifications and social consequences, listened attentively, weighing the credibility of her account against previous assumptions and biases. Amelia's detailed preparation and disciplined presentation made it clear that the harassment was systematic, deliberate, and orchestrated to suppress her and protect Preston's social and political advantage. Throughout the day, Amelia continued to observe, analyze, and respond to the actions of her peers and teachers. Each interaction became an opportunity to reinforce her credibility, assert control over her own narrative, and subtly challenge the structures of privilege that had enabled the harassment. Students who had previously participated in gossip or laughter began to recognize the deliberate attacks she had endured and the disciplined strategy she employed to navigate them. Her reputation shifted, reflecting her integrity, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to truth. By the end of the school day, the cumulative effects of Amelia's strategic awareness and methodical response were apparent. Preston's influence had been challenged, and the narrative of falsehoods he and Whitford had constructed began to crumble under the weight of her clarity and documentation. Teachers and administrators, confronted with consistent and credible accounts, were forced to acknowledge the deliberate harassment and bias that had shaped the environment. Amelia's composure and focus had effectively exposed the underlying dynamics, demonstrating that strategic observation and disciplined response could counteract even entrenched privilege and authority. As she walked through the empty halls toward the school exit, Amelia reflected on the lessons embedded in the day's events. She recognized the power of careful observation, methodical documentation, and strategic communication in confronting harassment and systemic bias. Her father's teachings had guided her, providing the foundation for her ability to endure, respond, and ultimately assert control over the narrative. Each step, each measured response, reinforced the notion that integrity and careful strategy could overcome even deliberate attempts to undermine her credibility and dignity. Amelia's actions had transformed her from a student under attack into a figure of resilience and authority within Westbridge High. Her composure, strategic awareness, and methodical approach to documenting and responding to harassment had shifted the perception of her peers and teachers. She had demonstrated that courage, clarity, and integrity were not merely abstract ideals but practical tools for navigating and overcoming systemic injustice. The events of the day served as both a personal victory and a demonstration to others of the efficacy of discipline, observation, and strategic thinking in challenging entrenched hierarchies and bias. By the evening, the impact of Amelia's conduct was evident across the school. Students who had once whispered and laughed now approached her with respect or cautious acknowledgement. The administration, forced to review evidence and confront its own complicity, began taking steps to address bias and harassment. Preston's credibility was diminished, and Whitford's authority was questioned. Amelia's methodical, composed, and strategic approach had successfully exposed the orchestration of intimidation and social manipulation while establishing her as a student capable of navigating adversity with intelligence and moral courage. Ultimately, Idea 8 illustrates a turning point where Amelia Carter's discipline, strategic observation, and methodical response transformed her circumstances. She had faced ongoing harassment, false accusations, and the subtle machinations of privilege and authority, yet her clarity, composure, and careful documentation enabled her to confront the situation effectively. Through careful strategy, observation, and unwavering integrity, Amelia not only defended herself but began to shift the broader social and administrative dynamics of Westbridge High, laying the groundwork for eventual justice and recognition. By the 9th day of escalating tension at Westbridge High, Amelia Carter had come to understand that endurance alone would not be enough to navigate the environment. Each interaction, each movement, each glance from her peers or teachers could potentially be used to manipulate perception or reinforce false narratives. Amelia had learned to anticipate these dynamics, to maintain composure, and to act with purpose in every situation. Her backpack, stacked with textbooks and notebooks filled with carefully documented observations, symbolized not only her academic diligence but also the strategic preparation that had become essential to surviving the school's treacherous social landscape. The morning began with a sense of cautious vigilance. Amelia entered her first period classroom, noting the positions of students and teachers alike. Preston Hale, the senator's son, had not ceased his campaign of subtle intimidation. His eyes followed her movements, and he whispered comments that were meant to provoke or unsettle. Amelia responded with a calm awareness, focusing on her notes and the lesson rather than the petty theatrics designed to undermine her. Her consistent composure gradually began to shift the perception of those around her. Classmates who had previously participated in gossip now observed with curiosity and tentative respect, recognizing the deliberate self-control she displayed under pressure. Throughout the morning, Amelia documented every interaction with meticulous care. She recorded times, locations, and the specific words spoken by Preston, Mrs. Whitford, and other students who participated in harassment or manipulation. Her notebook became a critical tool, not only for defending herself but for establishing a clear record of the systematic attempts to discredit and intimidate her. Each entry reinforced her confidence, reminding her that knowledge and preparation could counteract even the most subtle attempts at psychological pressure. The cafeteria presented the most immediate challenge. Amelia approached her usual corner table, aware that Preston and his clique would be watching. The previous incident's milk poured over her head, whispered accusations, and planted evidence had taught her to anticipate every potential escalation. She sat with precision, placed her tray carefully, and opened her notebook. Every action was deliberate, designed to communicate control, awareness, and composure. Preston, sensing that his usual tactics were ineffective, attempted subtler forms of intimidation, sidelong glances, exaggerated gestures, and whispered comments to nearby students. Amelia remained unfazed, her calm demeanor acting as a counterweight to the social pressure he attempted to exert. At one point, Preston deliberately brushed against her chair, knocking a notebook to the floor. Amelia bent to retrieve it, ensuring that her actions were methodical and composed. She did not respond verbally or physically, knowing that any reaction could be manipulated to portray her as defensive or guilty. Her measured response reinforced the perception that she was in control, capable of navigating harassment without succumbing to it. Observers, including those who had previously ridiculed her, began to recognize the strategic awareness she employed, shifting the social dynamics subtly but decisively. The issue of the Rolex remained a pivotal point of contention. Preston's accusation had forced the administration to pay attention, but Amelia knew that presenting a clear and logical narrative was essential. She approached the supervising teacher calmly, detailing the sequence of events and identifying witnesses who could corroborate her account. Her explanation was precise, leaving little room for doubt or misinterpretation. The teacher, confronted with consistent evidence and Amelia's composed demeanor, began to reconsider the earlier assumptions made about her credibility. Later, Principal Raymond Collins convened a meeting to assess the situation further. Amelia entered the office, prepared with documentation, witness statements, and a clear chronology of events. She explained how Preston had orchestrated public humiliation and attempted to manipulate evidence to frame her, how Mrs. Whitford had supported this manipulation, and how systemic bias within the school allowed these actions to persist. Collins listened, occasionally interjecting questions, but Amelia responded with calm clarity, addressing each point with factual precision. Her organized presentation created a compelling case that highlighted not only her innocence but the calculated nature of the harassment. As the day progressed, Amelia's strategic approach extended beyond direct interactions. She observed her peers, identifying students who had previously aligned with Preston or participated in gossip. She anticipated potential conflicts or attempts to manipulate the narrative and positioned herself in ways that minimized risk while maximizing the clarity of her own behavior. Each action she took was calculated to reinforce her credibility, demonstrating that careful observation and methodical responses could counteract even deliberate social manipulation. By mid-afternoon, it became clear that Amelia's efforts were reshaping the perception of those around her. Students who had previously whispered or laughed began to recognize the deliberate harassment she endured and the disciplined, strategic manner in which she addressed it. Her reputation gradually shifted from that of a victim to that of a figure demonstrating resilience, intelligence, and moral clarity. Even Preston, frustrated by the failure of his tactics, began to lose credibility as observers noted the contrast between his entitled behavior and Amelia's composed, evidence-based responses. Amelia's success on this day was not solely based on the events themselves but on her ability to remain strategic, composed, and methodical throughout. She maintained control over the narrative by focusing on facts, documenting incidents, and responding only when necessary. Her actions reinforced a central principle that integrity, preparation, and composure could overcome even the most persistent and deliberate attempts at intimidation. The administration, teachers, and students were all forced to acknowledge the credibility she had established through consistent and disciplined behavior. By the end of the school day, the cumulative impact of Amelia's strategic actions was evident. The narrative of falsehoods orchestrated by Preston and supported by Whitford began to crumble under the weight of her evidence and composure. Students and staff alike recognized the deliberate nature of the harassment and the unfair advantages previously exploited by those in positions of privilege. Amelia had not only defended her own reputation but also highlighted broader patterns of bias and manipulation, challenging the status quo in subtle but meaningful ways. As Amelia left the school building, she reflected on the lessons of the day. The careful observation, documentation, and disciplined response she had employed were not simply tools for survival but powerful strategies for confronting systemic injustice. Her father's teachings in resilience, strategy, and integrity had been instrumental in guiding her approach. Every step, every carefully considered reaction, reinforced the principle that courage, clarity, and strategic thought could counteract intimidation and restore balance in even the most challenging environments. Ultimately, the 9th day marked a pivotal turning point for Amelia. She had navigated repeated harassment, false accusations, and the subtle manipulations of both peers and authority figures with precision and integrity. Her methodical approach, strategic observation, and unwavering adherence to truth allowed her to assert control over the narrative, gradually reshaping the social dynamics of Westbridge High. Amelia emerged from the day not only vindicated but recognized as a student capable of confronting adversity with intelligence, resilience, and moral clarity, setting the stage for the eventual resolution of the broader conflict. By the 10th day, the atmosphere at Westbridge High had grown tense and palpable. Amelia Carter had learned that endurance and composure were not enough. She needed strategy, precision, and a clear plan for how to address the harassment and false accusations that had consumed her life for over a week. Every hallway, every classroom, every glance from a teacher or peer carried weight. Amelia's awareness of her surroundings was sharper than ever, her notebook a record of every detail that could be leveraged to reveal the truth. The balance of power had shifted subtly, but she knew the tipping point could come at any moment, and she prepared herself mentally to act with deliberate care. Her first class began with the usual undercurrent of tension. Whitford, still visibly irritated from the previous confrontations, kept a watchful eye on Amelia. Preston Hale, ever the opportunist, whispered to his friends, attempting to create distractions and provoke reactions. Amelia, however, maintained focus on her assignments, her pen moving deliberately across her notebook. Every jot of information, every observation about classmates or staff, served not only as a record but as a strategic reinforcement of her credibility. She understood that documentation could protect her and serve as evidence when the administration could no longer deny the pattern of harassment and manipulation. During mid-morning, Amelia anticipated the movement of students in the halls, planning routes that would minimize unnecessary confrontation while maintaining visibility. Preston and his clique were known to seek opportunities for intimidation, lingering in doorways or leaning against lockers to assert dominance. Amelia navigated the corridors with precision, aware of the space and the social dynamics at play. Her steps were deliberate, her posture confident, and her expressions controlled, projecting calm determination and signaling that she would not be easily swayed or provoked. In the cafeteria, the atmosphere was charged. Students whispered and observed, many curious to see how Amelia would respond to the ongoing tension. Preston positioned himself nearby, smirking as he attempted to orchestrate subtle forms of harassment, knocking over trays, shifting chairs, and making comments to peers that were meant to isolate and intimidate her. Amelia remained poised, collecting her lunch methodically, placing her tray carefully and maintaining a steady gaze. She did not react to the provocations, understanding that any display of emotion could be twisted to reinforce false narratives. Instead, she relied on her awareness and precise actions to demonstrate control and resilience. Preston escalated by making a direct accusation regarding the Rolex incident, claiming in a loud voice that Amelia had tampered with his belongings. Amelia responded calmly, factually, and without emotion, "I have not been near your locker or your possessions. I avoid them whenever possible." Her measured delivery contrasted sharply with Preston's theatrics, compelling nearby students and supervising staff to consider the credibility of each account. Her clarity and confidence began to shift perceptions, subtly undermining the influence Preston had wielded for so long. Later that morning, Amelia was called to meet with a supervising teacher regarding recent incidents. She arrived prepared, her notebook open with carefully recorded details, times, locations, interactions, and witness accounts. She presented the information with precision, outlining the sequence of events, Preston's intentional harassment, and the supportive role Mrs. Whitford had played in perpetuating the attacks. Her calm and organized explanation left little room for misinterpretation and made clear that the pattern of harassment was systematic and deliberate. The teacher, confronted with consistent and logical documentation, began to recognize the credibility of Amelia's account. Principal Raymond Collins convened a meeting to review the full scope of events. Amelia entered, confident and composed, presenting her findings and observations in chronological order. She described the harassment, the falsified accusations, and the social manipulation orchestrated by Preston and reinforced by Whitford. Her delivery was methodical and factual, highlighting inconsistencies in the opposing narratives and emphasizing the deliberate orchestration of events designed to damage her reputation. Collins listened attentively, realizing the weight of Amelia's evidence and the potential implications for both the school's credibility and student well-being. Throughout the afternoon, Amelia continued to observe and interact with her peers strategically. She maintained composure during class discussions and group activities, ensuring her credibility was evident to teachers and students alike. She anticipated potential provocations, positioning herself to minimize risk while reinforcing the clarity of her own actions. Her peers, who had previously followed Preston's lead, now began to reassess their understanding of the situation, noting Amelia's disciplined and rational approach to conflict. Her reputation shifted further, from that of a target to a respected figure demonstrating resilience and intelligence. By mid-afternoon, Amelia had successfully exposed the systematic nature of the harassment. Her careful documentation, precise communication, and composed responses provided an irrefutable account of events. Students and staff who had previously ignored or trivialized the situation could no longer dispute the evidence. Preston's credibility suffered as the contrast between his entitled, manipulative behavior and Amelia's calm, factual presentation became evident. Whitford's role in supporting and enabling harassment was increasingly questioned, forcing her to confront the implications of her own actions. Amelia's strategic approach was deliberate and comprehensive. She knew that maintaining credibility, demonstrating integrity, and documenting every interaction were essential to counteracting the entrenched bias and privilege she faced. Her actions were not reactive but anticipatory, allowing her to maintain control over her own narrative while subtly reshaping the perceptions of those around her. By focusing on observable facts, structured presentation, and consistent composure, Amelia created a foundation of evidence that could not be easily dismissed or refuted. As the school day drew to a close, the cumulative impact of Amelia's strategy became clear. Her reputation had shifted significantly, her credibility reinforced through careful observation, documentation, and measured responses. The administration, faced with a comprehensive and factual account, could no longer ignore the pattern of harassment and manipulation. Students who had participated in gossip or intimidation were forced to recognize the calculated nature of the attacks and the effectiveness of Amelia's disciplined approach. By the time Amelia exited the school, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Her careful planning, strategic observation, and methodical responses had allowed her to navigate a hostile environment, defend her integrity, and challenge the power dynamics that had previously marginalized her. She understood that her father's teachings, discipline, resilience, and strategic thinking had equipped her with the tools necessary to confront systematic bias and social manipulation effectively. Ultimately, the 10th day marked a turning point for Amelia. Through strategic observation, precise documentation, and unwavering composure, she had shifted the balance of power and demonstrated the effectiveness of integrity and preparation in confronting injustice. Her actions had not only protected her own reputation but also exposed the deliberate harassment and manipulation that had undermined the fairness and equity of Westbridge High. Amelia's experience underscored the power of strategic action, moral clarity, and disciplined observation in overcoming adversity and challenging entrenched systems of privilege. By the 11th day at Westbridge High, Amelia Carter had established a rhythm of strategic awareness and careful observation that guided her through every interaction. Each class, hallway, and social setting was analyzed in advance, every possible confrontation anticipated, and every movement carefully calculated. The harassment from Preston Hale and the complicity of Mrs. Whitford had made the stakes clear. Her reputation, her dignity, and even her educational future were at risk. Amelia knew that maintaining composure alone was not enough. She needed to document, anticipate, and strategically respond to every attempt to undermine her credibility. Morning began with a heightened sense of vigilance. Amelia entered her first period classroom with her backpack securely in place, notebook at the ready. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the positions of Preston, his friends, and other students who had previously contributed to the gossip or intimidation. Preston leaned back in his chair, attempting to convey ease and dominance, but Amelia's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with his performative behavior. Every interaction she had in class was deliberate, as she spoke only when necessary, and her responses were factual, measured, and confident. Each answer she gave, each comment she made, reinforced her credibility and highlighted the contrast between her disciplined approach and Preston's entitled behavior. During a brief passing period, Amelia navigated the crowded hallways with the precision of someone well trained in situational awareness. She anticipated potential encounters, choosing routes that allowed her to avoid unnecessary confrontation while remaining visible to supervising staff. Preston, always alert to opportunity, attempted to create friction, positioning himself near her path and whispering to his friends. Amelia continued to project composure and confidence, understanding that visible control and consistency were critical in challenging the false narratives surrounding her. By mid-morning, Amelia reached the cafeteria, the previous scene of harassment and public humiliation. She selected her usual corner table, placing her tray and notebook carefully. Preston and his clique observed from across the room, attempting subtle forms of intimidation, including exaggerated gestures and whispered remarks intended to unsettle her. Amelia ignored the provocations, methodically eating her lunch and reviewing her notes. Her calm composure served as a form of resistance, demonstrating to onlookers that she would not react emotionally to orchestrated harassment, and that her control over the situation remained intact. The Rolex accusation remained a focal point of tension. Preston continued to claim that Amelia had tampered with or stolen the watch, presenting his narrative to the supervising teacher in the cafeteria. Amelia responded with factual clarity, "I have not touched your belongings. I avoid them whenever possible." Her precise articulation, combined with the evidence she had collected, began to shift the perception of staff and students who had been uncertain or complicit in the earlier days. Amelia's credibility grew stronger with each interaction, her calm demeanor reinforcing the reliability of her account. Later in the morning, a supervising teacher requested Amelia to provide a detailed account of the previous week's incidents. Amelia approached with her notebook, prepared with detailed records, times, witness names, and sequences of events. She calmly explained the orchestrated harassment, the deliberate humiliation in the cafeteria, and Preston's ongoing manipulations, highlighting Mrs. Whitford's complicity. Her structured delivery was precise and compelling, leaving little room for doubt. The teacher, confronted with both the documentation and Amelia's composed explanation, began to recognize the credibility and consistency of her account. In the afternoon, Principal Raymond Collins convened a formal meeting to address the ongoing situation. Amelia entered with confidence, aware of the significance of the encounter. She presented her documented evidence, explained the sequence of harassment, and outlined the manipulations orchestrated by Preston and facilitated by Whitford. Her delivery was measured and strategic, emphasizing factual clarity and logical consistency. Collins listened carefully, understanding that Amelia's credibility had been established through both evidence and conduct, and that the prior assumptions about her needed serious reassessment. Throughout the day, Amelia maintained her strategic approach during classes, hallway transitions, and lunch periods. She carefully monitored interactions, anticipated provocations, and responded in ways that reinforced her credibility. Her consistent, composed behavior gradually shifted the perception of students who had previously participated in gossip or ridiculed her. They began to observe her as a figure of intelligence, strategy, and resilience rather than a target of ridicule. Preston's attempts at manipulation grew increasingly ineffective, and his confidence began to falter under the weight of Amelia's controlled responses. Amelia's meticulous documentation and methodical responses had another effect. The administration was compelled to confront patterns of bias and harassment that had previously gone unexamined. Each factual account she presented, combined with her calm demeanor, illuminated the deliberate orchestration of events designed to intimidate and manipulate her. The school staff, including teachers and administrators, could no longer ignore the evidence. Amelia's strategic approach had transformed her position from a student under attack to a student whose credibility commanded attention and respect. By late afternoon, the cumulative impact of Amelia's approach was evident. Preston's influence diminished as observers recognized the deliberate harassment and manipulation he had orchestrated. Whitford's authority was increasingly questioned, and the administration began reviewing evidence more critically. Amelia's calm, documented, and precise responses had created a body of evidence that exposed the systemic nature of bias and harassment within the school. Her strategy demonstrated that careful observation, methodical documentation, and composure could effectively challenge entrenched privilege and authority. As the school day ended, Amelia reflected on the significance of the events. Her careful planning, strategic observation, and disciplined responses had allowed her to navigate a hostile environment, defend her reputation, and assert control over the narrative. She recognized that the lessons imparted by her father, discipline, critical thinking, and moral courage had been essential in preparing her for this challenge. Every step she had taken, every calculated response had reinforced the principle that integrity, strategy, and composure could overcome even the most orchestrated attempts to undermine her. The 11th day represented a crucial turning point for Amelia Carter. Her strategic documentation, methodical approach, and unwavering composure had begun to shift the balance of power at Westbridge High. The harassment and false narratives that had previously dominated her environment were now being scrutinized, questioned, and dismantled. Students, teachers, and administrators were all forced to recognize the credibility and resilience that Amelia demonstrated through careful planning, observation, and action. Ultimately, Idea 11 illustrates a stage in which Amelia Carter had transformed her position from that of a targeted student to one of credibility, influence, and strategic advantage. By maintaining composure, documenting events meticulously, and responding to challenges with clarity and precision, she had established herself as a capable and resilient figure. Her actions underscored the effectiveness of strategic thinking, moral clarity, and disciplined conduct in confronting harassment and systemic injustice, setting the stage for the resolution of the broader conflicts at Westbridge High. By the 12th day at Westbridge High, Amelia Carter had grown increasingly aware of the stakes surrounding her situation. The events of the past week's harassment by Preston Hale, manipulation by Mrs. Whitford, and bias from the administration had transformed her ordinary school experience into a complex challenge requiring strategy, observation, and endurance. Amelia knew that to navigate the environment successfully, she needed to be deliberate in every action, aware of every interaction, and prepared to document every incident that could later serve as evidence of the injustice she faced. Her notebook, filled with meticulous observations, had become both shield and weapon, representing the power of preparation and clarity. The morning began with a calculated assessment of the classroom dynamics. Amelia entered her first period class and quickly scanned the room, noting the positions of Preston and his clique, as well as other students whose behavior might influence the perception of her actions. Preston smirked from across the room, attempting to assert dominance, but Amelia's composed demeanor made his theatrics ineffective. Every response she gave during class, every answer she provided to the teacher, was precise and deliberate, reinforcing her credibility while subtly challenging the influence Preston sought to exert over the classroom. During the mid-morning passing period, Amelia moved through the crowded halls with purpose. She anticipated potential confrontations, adjusting her route to avoid direct collisions while remaining visible to staff. Preston, trying to intimidate through presence alone, positioned himself at strategic points along her path, whispering to his friends and attempting to create unease. Amelia's response was calm and controlled. She maintained confident posture, steady gaze, and precise steps, demonstrating that she would not allow intimidation to dictate her behavior. Each moment of calculated composure reinforced the growing respect her peers had begun to show. By the time she reached the cafeteria, Amelia had already mentally rehearsed her actions for the period. She carried her lunch with methodical care and selected her usual corner table, balancing visibility with safety. Preston and his friends observed from across the room, attempting subtle forms of harassment through body language, whispered comments, and indirect intimidation. Amelia remained composed, unpacking her lunch and reviewing her notes. Her calm demeanor acted as a counterweight to the orchestrated tension, signaling to those around her that she retained control and would not succumb to provocation. Preston escalated the tension by bumping into Amelia's chair in an attempt to disrupt her, sending a notebook tumbling to the floor. Amelia bent to retrieve it, deliberately measured in her movements, ensuring her response could not be misconstrued as defensive or aggressive. The contrast between her composed response and Preston's attempt at dominance highlighted her growing mastery of situational strategy. Observers, particularly students who had previously mocked or gossiped, began to recognize the deliberate planning behind her calm responses, further enhancing her credibility and authority in the school environment. The ongoing Rolex accusation remained a pivotal point of stress. Amelia approached her supervising teacher with clear documentation, outlining the timeline of events and identifying witnesses who could corroborate her account. Her factual presentation, free from emotional appeal or dramatization, contrasted sharply with Preston's performative narrative. The teacher, confronted with the consistency and clarity of Amelia's report, began to question the validity of the false accusations and to consider the broader context of harassment and bias that had influenced prior perceptions. Later in the morning, Principal Raymond Collins requested a formal meeting to assess the cumulative evidence. Amelia entered with her notebook, fully prepared to present the series of events chronologically. She detailed Preston's deliberate harassment, the setup with the Rolex, and Whitford's role in facilitating the unfair treatment. Her methodical delivery emphasized observable facts and logical connections, highlighting the systemic bias present in the school environment. Collins, attentive and cautious, began to see the pattern and the strength of Amelia's case, recognizing that her documentation and calm, precise responses had established credibility and authority in the situation. Throughout the afternoon, Amelia maintained her strategic approach in classrooms and during transitions. She carefully monitored her surroundings, anticipated possible provocations, and acted with deliberation to reinforce her integrity. By responding only when necessary and presenting facts consistently, she gradually shifted peer perception. Those who had previously contributed to gossip or ridicule began to notice the deliberate and methodical nature of her responses. Recognizing that Amelia was not merely defending herself but asserting control over her narrative and challenging systemic inequities, Preston's influence began to wane as his repeated attempts to provoke Amelia failed. His theatrics, once persuasive to his peers, now seemed transparent and ineffective. Even Mrs. Whitford's authority was undermined as the clarity and consistency of Amelia's account highlighted her complicity in orchestrating unfair treatment. The administration, faced with a detailed record, repeated corroborations, and Amelia's composed demeanor, could no longer maintain the appearance that her situation was a simple misunderstanding or an isolated incident. By the end of the school day, Amelia had successfully demonstrated both resilience and strategic acumen. Her precise documentation, disciplined responses, and calm, methodical approach had exposed the orchestrated nature of harassment and bias. Students and staff were forced to recognize her credibility and the deliberate manipulation by Preston and Whitford. The dynamics of power and influence at Westbridge High had begun to shift, with Amelia emerging as a figure of integrity and strategic competence, capable of navigating complex social and institutional challenges. As she left the school, Amelia reflected on the lessons of the day. Every step, every calculated response, every documented observation had reinforced the principle that preparation, clarity, and moral courage could counteract even the most systemic and persistent attempts at intimidation. Her father's teachings had prepared her not only to endure challenges but to navigate them strategically, asserting control over the narrative and demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity. The 12th day marked a turning point for Amelia. Through strategic documentation, methodical presentation, and calm composure, she had begun to reshape perceptions within Westbridge High. The orchestrated harassment, false accusations, and institutional bias that had defined her experience were being scrutinized and challenged. Amelia had transformed from a student targeted for ridicule into a credible, respected figure capable of influencing the social and administrative dynamics around her. Ultimately, Dia 12 illustrates a crucial stage in Amelia Carter's journey. She had used strategy, observation, and precise documentation to confront ongoing harassment and bias effectively. Her calm, methodical approach had reinforced her credibility, challenged the orchestrated manipulation of her reputation, and shifted the social dynamics at Westbridge High. By the end of the day, Amelia had not only defended her integrity but also demonstrated that discipline, strategy, moral clarity, and perseverance are powerful tools in overcoming systemic injustice. The 13th day at Westbridge High felt different from all the previous days. Amelia Carter walked through the halls with a sense of purpose that was no longer tentative but resolute. Each step she took, each glance she gave to her classmates, carried the weight of someone who had endured and learned from days of harassment, false accusations, and manipulation. The environment that had once seemed oppressive now served as a landscape she could navigate strategically, using her observations, careful documentation, and composure to reinforce her credibility and authority. She understood the stakes, and she knew that maintaining control over her actions was essential to confronting the systemic bias embedded in the school's social hierarchy. The first period class began with the usual undercurrent of tension, Whitford, still visibly frustrated from previous confrontations, kept a sharp eye on Amelia. Preston Hale, seated across the room, whispered comments to his friends in an attempt to provoke her. Amelia, however, remained focused on her assignments, her pen moving deliberately across her notebook. She was aware of every interaction, observing body language, tone, and positioning. Each response she gave during class was precise and factual, demonstrating to her teacher and peers that she could maintain clarity and control even under pressure. This calm confidence contrasted sharply with Preston's performative arrogance, gradually undermining his influence over the classroom. During the mid-morning passing period, Amelia navigated the crowded hallways with careful attention to her surroundings. Preston attempted to assert dominance by positioning himself strategically along her path, whispering to friends and trying to create tension. Amelia anticipated these tactics and adjusted her movements accordingly, maintaining composure and projecting confidence. Her deliberate posture, steady gaze, and purposeful steps conveyed that she was fully aware of the environment and capable of navigating challenges without being provoked. Students who had previously participated in gossip began to observe, recognizing her resilience and the strategic nature of her actions. By mid-morning, the cafeteria had become another arena for testing her composure and strategic thinking. Amelia approached her usual corner table, carrying her lunch with methodical care. Preston and his friends observed her, subtly attempting to intimidate through whispered remarks, exaggerated gestures, and calculated stares. Amelia remained calm, unpacking her lunch and reviewing her notes. Her consistent composure signaled to bystanders that she was in control, and it made it clear that she would not allow provocation to dictate her responses. Her actions became a demonstration of disciplined resilience, drawing respect from those who had doubted or ridiculed her in the past. Preston attempted another escalation, deliberately bumping into her chair to unsettle her. Amelia bent to retrieve her notebook with precise movements, avoiding any reaction that could be interpreted as aggression. Her calm and methodical behavior emphasized her control over the situation, exposing the calculated nature of Preston's harassment. Other students, witnessing her composed response, began to see the contrast between her disciplined approach and Preston's entitled tactics. This shift in perception subtly altered the social dynamics, as peers began to reconsider the credibility of the narratives they had previously accepted. The ongoing controversy over the Rolex remained a central point of tension. Amelia approached her supervising teacher to provide a detailed account of the prior incidents. She meticulously outlined the sequence of events, identified witnesses, and explained Preston's orchestration of public humiliation and false accusations. Her calm, logical, and factual presentation made it clear that the harassment was deliberate and systematic. The teacher, confronted with this consistent and organized documentation, began to understand the credibility of Amelia's claims and the unfairness of the accusations that had been levied against her. Later, Principal Raymond Collins convened a formal meeting to review the accumulating evidence. Amelia entered with her notebook in hand, prepared to present a comprehensive and chronological account of the harassment, the manipulations, and the administrative oversights that had allowed it to persist. She spoke clearly and deliberately, emphasizing observable facts, sequences of events, and the credibility of witnesses. Collins listened attentively, recognizing that Amelia's documentation, composed demeanor, and logical presentation created a compelling case that could not be dismissed lightly. Her preparation highlighted the systematic nature of the harassment and the bias that had contributed to it. Throughout the afternoon, Amelia continued to maintain her strategic approach during classes, hallway transitions, and lunch periods. She monitored interactions closely, anticipating potential provocations and responding in ways that reinforced her credibility. By responding only when necessary and maintaining consistent composure, she gradually shifted peer perception. Students who had previously participated in gossip or intimidation began to recognize her disciplined responses and strategic thinking. The credibility she had established through careful observation and documentation began to challenge the entrenched power of Preston and Whitford. Preston's repeated attempts to provoke Amelia continued to fail, eroding his influence. His actions, once considered dominant and persuasive, now appeared transparent and ineffective compared to Amelia's measured approach. Whitford's authority similarly was challenged by Amelia's consistent documentation and methodical presentation of evidence. The administration, forced to review the records, began to recognize the pattern of harassment and bias. Amelia's disciplined approach had exposed the orchestration behind the attacks and demonstrated that strategic observation, methodical documentation, and calm composure could counteract entrenched privilege and manipulation. By the end of the school day, the cumulative impact of Amelia's actions was clear. Her credibility was firmly established, her evidence irrefutable, and her reputation had shifted from a target of harassment to a figure demonstrating resilience, intelligence, and moral authority. Students and staff alike were forced to acknowledge the deliberate nature of Preston's actions and Whitford's complicity. The social and administrative dynamics of Westbridge High began to change as a result of her strategic approach, careful observation, and disciplined behavior. As she walked home, Amelia reflected on the lessons she had learned. Each step, each calculated response, and every documented interaction reinforced the principle that preparation, clarity, and moral courage were powerful tools for confronting systemic injustice. Her father's teachings had prepared her to navigate complex social and institutional challenges with strategy and integrity. The events of the day served as a reminder that careful observation, methodical documentation, and disciplined composure could not only protect her but also challenge and expose unfair systems of authority. Ultimately, the 13th day marked another pivotal moment in Amelia Carter's journey. Through strategic observation, careful documentation, and unwavering composure, she continued to assert control over her narrative and challenge the systemic bias and harassment that had threatened her. Her actions reinforced her credibility, undermined the false narratives constructed against her, and demonstrated the effectiveness of integrity, strategy, and perseverance in confronting adversity. Amelia had transformed from a student under attack into a capable, resilient figure whose disciplined and strategic approach set the stage for eventual resolution and justice at Westbridge High. The 14th day at Westbridge High carried a different energy. Amelia Carter moved through the halls with an assured confidence, the weight of the previous day's experiences lending clarity to her purpose. She had faced harassment, false accusations, and administrative bias repeatedly, yet she had emerged each time with greater composure and strategy. Her notebook, a meticulously maintained record of incidents, observations, and responses, had become a symbol of her preparedness and determination. Each step she took through the hallways was deliberate, every glance calculated to assert her presence and control over her narrative. Morning began with a renewed sense of vigilance. Amelia entered her first period classroom, noting the positions of Preston Hale, his clique, and other students who might contribute to gossip or intimidation. Preston attempted to assert dominance through subtle gestures and whispered comments, but Amelia's calm demeanor and deliberate attention to her work rendered his efforts ineffective. Her responses to any interaction were precise, factual, and measured, reinforcing her credibility and subtly challenging the perception that she could be intimidated. This consistency began to influence the perception of her peers, who were slowly recognizing the deliberate and disciplined nature of her behavior. As the morning progressed, Amelia's strategic observation became more pronounced. She moved through the hallways during passing periods with careful awareness, choosing paths that minimized potential conflict while keeping her visible to staff. Preston attempted to manipulate the environment by placing himself at strategic points along her route, but Amelia anticipated his moves, maintaining a steady pace and purposeful posture that projected confidence and control. Students who had previously mocked or whispered now watched her actions with growing respect, noting the deliberate and composed manner in which she navigated the social landscape. By mid-morning, the cafeteria became the focus of attention. Amelia approached her usual corner table, carrying her lunch with methodical care. Preston and his friends attempted to intimidate her through gestures, whispered remarks, and indirect provocations. Amelia remained focused, unpacking her lunch and reviewing her notes with careful attention. Her calm demeanor served as a counterbalance to the orchestrated tension in the room, signaling to observers that she retained control over the situation and would not allow provocation to dictate her behavior. Her measured actions became a subtle form of resistance, demonstrating resilience and strategic awareness. Preston escalated his efforts, attempting to disrupt her by bumping her chair and displacing her notebook. Amelia retrieved her materials with deliberate precision, ensuring her movements could not be misinterpreted as defensive or aggressive. Her composed response contrasted sharply with Preston's performative tactics, revealing the calculated nature of his harassment. Observers began to notice the disparity, leading some students to reconsider their previous assumptions about both Amelia and Preston. The social dynamics within the cafeteria shifted subtly, reflecting Amelia's growing influence through controlled, disciplined behavior. The issue of the Rolex accusation remained central. Amelia approached the supervising teacher to provide a detailed, factual account of the sequence of events. She outlined the harassment, identified witnesses, and demonstrated the deliberate orchestration behind the false accusations. Her calm, logical, and organized explanation emphasized the systematic nature of the events, leaving the teacher with a clear understanding of her credibility. The presentation of her documented evidence highlighted the importance of preparation, observation, and consistency in countering manipulation and bias. Later in the morning, Principal Raymond Collins convened a formal meeting to review the accumulated evidence. Amelia entered with her notebook, presenting her findings in a precise, chronological order. She described the harassment, the setup with the Rolex, and the complicity of Mrs. Whitford, emphasizing observable facts and corroborating details. Collins listened carefully, acknowledging the clarity and consistency of Amelia's account. The evidence demonstrated not only her innocence but also the deliberate efforts to manipulate perceptions and maintain an unfair hierarchy within the school. Amelia's composed and structured delivery reinforced her credibility, challenging the assumptions and biases that had previously dominated the administration's response. Throughout the afternoon, Amelia continued to apply strategic observation and deliberate action. In classes, she responded to questions with accuracy and precision, avoiding unnecessary conflict while subtly asserting her authority through competence. During hallway transitions and lunch periods, she navigated the social environment carefully, anticipating potential provocations and positioning herself to maintain control. Her methodical approach drew attention to the contrast between her composed demeanor and Preston's erratic attempts at intimidation. Students who had previously participated in gossip began to observe her as a figure of resilience and intelligence, gradually shifting the balance of influence. Preston's repeated provocations failed to produce the desired effect. His attempts at intimidation became increasingly transparent, and his credibility eroded under the weight of Amelia's consistent, factual, and composed responses. Even Mrs. Whitford's authority was undermined as Amelia's documented evidence and strategic comportment highlighted the deliberate nature of the harassment. The administration, faced with a clear, factual account and consistent behavior, began to reconsider prior judgments, acknowledging the systemic nature of the bias and harassment Amelia had endured. By the end of the school day, Amelia had solidified her position within Westbridge High. Her credibility was firmly established, and her disciplined approach had shifted perceptions among students and staff alike. The orchestrated harassment, false accusations, and social manipulation that had previously defined her experience were being scrutinized and questioned. Amelia's calm, methodical, and strategic actions had transformed her from a target of intimidation into a student whose integrity and intelligence commanded attention and respect. As Amelia exited the school, she reflected on the lessons learned. Every documented observation, every calculated response, and every demonstration of composure had reinforced her understanding of strategy and resilience. Her father's teachings about discipline, integrity, and critical thinking had provided the foundation for navigating complex social and institutional challenges. Amelia had turned adversity into an opportunity to assert control, reinforce her credibility, and challenge systemic bias. Each step she took was deliberate, each action calculated to maintain composure and clarity in a difficult environment. Ultimately, the 14th day marked a significant turning point. Amelia's disciplined documentation, strategic observation, and composed responses had begun to dismantle the false narratives and social manipulation orchestrated against her. She had demonstrated that careful preparation, moral clarity, and strategic awareness could shift perceptions and challenge systemic injustice. Amelia had not only protected her reputation but had also begun to influence the social and administrative dynamics of Westbridge High, setting the stage for eventual resolution and justice. The 15th day at Westbridge High was unlike any other Amelia Carter had experienced. After weeks of calculated harassment, false accusations, and systemic bias, the culmination of her efforts, strategy, and resilience would finally come into focus. Amelia had meticulously documented every event, every interaction, every instance of intimidation. Her notebook, once merely a tool for organization, had become a testament to her discipline and a shield against the orchestrated attempts to undermine her. As she walked through the school corridors that morning, she did so with a quiet confidence, not the nervousness as of someone under threat, but the controlled awareness of someone prepared for the inevitable confrontation with truth and accountability. The first period classroom felt charged with anticipation. Mrs. Whitford, whose previously unchallenged authority had been steadily eroded by Amelia's strategic actions, sat with an unusual tension in her posture. Preston Hale, the senator's son, exuded a veneer of smugness, but there was an undercurrent of unease as well, a recognition that his manipulations were losing traction. Amelia sat in her usual seat, her notebook open, ready to note any critical details. Her pen moved deliberately, capturing observations and interactions as evidence of ongoing behavior. She had learned that preparation was power and that precision in recording events could turn the tables in an environment otherwise dominated by privilege and intimidation. By mid-morning, the cafeteria had become the focal point for what had been a series of orchestrated provocations. Amelia approached her usual corner table with deliberate care. Preston and his clique observed from across the room, hoping to provoke a reaction that would once again serve their narrative. Amelia unpacked her lunch with meticulous attention, deliberately projecting composure and focus. She did not flinch at the whispered comments or exaggerated gestures. Each movement she made, from opening her notebook to arranging her food, demonstrated control, signaling to those around her that she was capable of maintaining clarity and dignity in the face of provocation. Students who had previously joined in gossip or ridicule now observed her actions with a growing respect, recognizing the deliberate restraint and intelligence underlying her behavior. Preston escalated by attempting to trip her with a careless shove, targeting the gap between tables. Amelia bent deliberately to steady herself and retrieve her notebook, ensuring her movements were precise and could not be interpreted as overreaction or aggression. The contrast between her measured composure and Preston's theatrics was stark, highlighting the calculated nature of the harassment. Observers, both students and staff, began to see the disparity clearly, and the subtle shift in the cafeteria dynamics became palpable. Amelia's resilience, documentation, and strategic awareness were forcing recognition of the injustices she had endured. The ongoing Rolex accusation remained a central point of contention. Amelia approached the supervising teacher with calm clarity, presenting a comprehensive account of events. She outlined the harassment, identified witnesses, and demonstrated how Preston had manipulated circumstances to create the false impression of theft. Her presentation was methodical, factual, and deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The teacher, confronted with the combination of consistent documentation and composed explanation, began to understand the credibility of Amelia's claims and the deliberate orchestration behind the harassment she had faced. Later, Principal Raymond Collins convened a formal meeting to review the situation comprehensively. Amelia entered with her notebook, prepared to present a chronological record of harassment, false accusations, and bias within the administration. She detailed Preston's actions, Mrs. Whitford's complicity, and systemic issues that allowed the harassment to persist. Her presentation emphasized observable facts, corroborated witness statements, and logical sequencing. Collins, attentive and increasingly cognizant of the implications, realized that Amelia's account could not be dismissed. Her calm, factual, and strategic delivery underscored the seriousness and credibility of her case, forcing the administration to confront the systemic problems at play. Throughout the afternoon, Amelia continued to navigate interactions strategically. She engaged in class discussions with precision, carefully choosing words to reinforce her credibility without inciting unnecessary conflict. Hallway transitions were managed with deliberate pacing and spatial awareness, anticipating any attempts at intimidation from Preston or his clique. Her behavior consistently demonstrated self-control, resilience, and intelligence, reinforcing her reputation among peers and staff. Observers began to recognize the contrast between her composed and methodical approach and the erratic, performative behavior of her harassers. Preston's repeated attempts to provoke Amelia were increasingly ineffective. His manipulation and entitled behavior were transparent to those who had previously accepted them unquestioningly. Mrs. Whitford's authority, too, was being challenged by Amelia's documentation and methodical presentation of facts. The administration faced undeniable evidence, consistent testimony, and a student whose composure had been tested and proven resilient. Amelia's strategy, built on careful observation, documentation, and deliberate response, had begun to shift the balance of perception and power within the school. By late afternoon, the cumulative impact of Amelia's actions became clear. Her credibility was firmly established, her reputation strengthened, and the social and administrative dynamics of Westbridge High were changing in response to her disciplined approach. Students, teachers, and administrators were forced to acknowledge both the deliberate nature of the harassment and the effectiveness of Amelia's methodical and strategic responses. The orchestrated intimidation, false accusations, and social manipulation that had defined her experience were now being scrutinized and challenged. As she prepared to leave the school, Amelia reflected on the lessons embedded in these experiences. Every carefully recorded observation, every calculated response, and every moment of composure reinforced the principle that strategy, preparation, and moral courage could confront and counter systemic injustice. Her father's teachings in discipline, critical thinking, and integrity had been the foundation upon which she had built her strategic responses. Amelia recognized that endurance alone was not sufficient. Success required deliberate action, careful observation, and precise communication. The 15th day represented the culmination of Amelia Carter's journey through harassment, bias, and manipulation. She had transformed from a targeted student into a credible, resilient, and respected figure. Her consistent composure, methodical documentation, and strategic awareness had not only protected her reputation but had exposed systemic inequities and challenged the entrenched social hierarchy of Westbridge High. Her peers and teachers had witnessed a demonstration of intelligence, courage, and moral clarity, forcing recognition of the injustices that had been orchestrated against her. Ultimately, Idea 15 captures the resolution of Amelia's arc at Westbridge High. Her disciplined, strategic, and evidence-based approach had shifted perceptions, exposed manipulation, and asserted her integrity and credibility. Through careful documentation, deliberate observation, and composed responses, Amelia had navigated complex social dynamics and systemic bias, emerging not only vindicated but as a symbol of resilience and moral authority. The culmination of her efforts underscored the power of preparation, composure, and strategic thinking in confronting adversity and achieving justice. The story of Amelia Carter at Westbridge High serves as a compelling reminder of the importance of integrity, resilience, and strategic thinking when confronting injustice. One of the first lessons that emerges from her experience is that personal character matters more than appearances or social standing. Amelia, a scholarship student and the daughter of a highly respected military officer, faced relentless bullying and discrimination simply because she did not fit the expected mold of the school's elite. Her peers and even some authority figures assumed that her accomplishments were fabricated or exaggerated because they were accustomed to judging people by wealth, background, or social connections. Yet Amelia's unwavering commitment to truth and honesty allowed her to navigate these assumptions with poise and effectiveness. This teaches readers that, regardless of the external pressures to conform or be intimidated, holding steadfast to one's values and remaining truthful can ultimately provide both personal strength and moral leverage. Another significant lesson lies in the power of preparation and documentation. Throughout the story, Amelia meticulously recorded every incident of harassment, every false accusation, and every subtle form of social manipulation. While it may have seemed like a cautious or even burdensome practice at first, her careful record-keeping became a critical tool for establishing credibility. By noting times, witnesses, and sequences of events, Amelia transformed subjective experiences of bullying into objective evidence that could no longer be ignored by the administration or peers. This demonstrates a broader principle in situations where injustice or bias is present. Preparation and thoughtful documentation are not acts of paranoia, they are essential strategies for defending oneself and ensuring accountability. By systematically gathering and organizing facts, individuals can create a framework for clarity that supports truth and protects against manipulation. Resilience is another core theme reflected throughout Amelia's journey. The repeated harassment, social isolation, and false accusations could have crushed her spirit, yet she consistently demonstrated the ability to endure while remaining composed and strategic. Each challenge she faced was met with careful observation and deliberate response rather than impulsive reaction. This teaches an invaluable lesson about emotional regulation in adversity. Resilience is not merely about toughing it out, but about consciously choosing how to respond, maintaining focus on long-term objectives, and avoiding the traps set by those who seek to provoke or intimidate. Amelia's resilience was compounded by her strategic thinking, illustrating that endurance alone is insufficient without a plan or framework for action. Strategic thinking and situational awareness also emerge as crucial lessons in the story. Amelia's success was not simply a product of patience or moral superiority. It was the result of carefully analyzing her environment, anticipating potential threats, and taking deliberate steps to maintain control. She understood the motivations of those around her, including her bullies, her teacher, and the administration, and adjusted her actions accordingly. This highlights a critical insight when confronting injustice. Being strategic, understanding context, timing, and social dynamics can amplify the effectiveness of one's moral and ethical stance. Amelia's ability to navigate complex power structures demonstrates that courage without strategy can be undermined, but when combined, they create a force capable of challenging entrenched systems of bias and privilege. The story also emphasizes the importance of using support networks and authority wisely. Amelia's father, General Marcus Carter, while not present in her daily school life, provided the moral and ethical framework that guided her decisions and responses. His teachings instilled discipline, clarity, and an understanding of accountability that Amelia applied in her strategy. This teaches a broader lesson about mentorship, guidance, and the influence of role models in cultivating resilience and strategic thinking. Seeking counsel, drawing upon ethical principles instilled by trusted mentors, and applying these lessons in practical ways can provide both moral support and tactical advantage when confronting challenges. Furthermore, the narrative demonstrates the consequences of privilege when misused, as seen in Preston Hale and Mrs. Whitford. Their sense of entitlement and abuse of authority illustrates the dangers of unchecked power. Amelia's triumph over these forces highlights the principle that power is not absolute and that accountability can be established through evidence, strategic action, and composure. This serves as a lesson not only for those confronting injustice but also for those who wield influence and misuse of authority and inevitably invites scrutiny and consequences, especially when individuals like Amelia approach situations with integrity and strategy. Another critical lesson is the transformative effect of standing firm in one's truth. Amelia's ability to consistently present her side of the story with clarity, precision, and calmness gradually shifted perceptions among her peers and the administration. The social hierarchy, initially dominated by privilege and intimidation, began to recognize her credibility and fairness. This illustrates that persistence in asserting truth, combined with reasoned and strategic communication, can transform social dynamics. It teaches readers that truth is not merely a moral stance. It is an actionable strategy that, when consistently demonstrated, creates influence and fosters change. Finally, the story underscores the value of moral courage. Amelia faced repeated threats to her reputation, direct harassment, and systemic bias, yet she never compromised her principles or resorted to deceit to defend herself. This reinforces the lesson that courage is not just physical bravery but also the willingness to act ethically and strategically under pressure. Moral courage, combined with preparation, strategic thinking, and resilience, enables individuals to confront injustice effectively and can inspire change within systems that have historically favored privilege or biased power structures. In conclusion, Amelia Carter's story provides a rich tapestry of lessons applicable to both personal and broader societal contexts. Key takeaways include the importance of integrity and truth in the face of misjudgment, the value of meticulous documentation and preparation, the necessity of resilience and emotional regulation, the power of strategic thinking, the importance of support and ethical mentorship, and the transformative impact of moral courage. By applying these principles, individuals can navigate environments dominated by bias, manipulation, or privilege, assert control over their narrative, and achieve justice. Amelia's journey illustrates that even in the most challenging circumstances, disciplined, strategic, and principled action can overcome entrenched systems of injustice, leaving a lasting impact on both personal growth and the surrounding community. Her story serves as a model for confronting adversity with intelligence, foresight, and unwavering ethical commitment, offering readers a blueprint for navigating their own challenges with confidence and integrity. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.